Of all the rabbit holes I get stuck in on the internet, I don't know any quite as powerful as Google Earth. Seeing beautiful patterns from above, dropping down into Street View, and seeing the planet in ways I would never get to see in person. So when I came across this post on Reddit, I was fascinated. It described undocumented markings in Algeria, in the middle of the Sahara, near a location called Tebel Balet Tomb, visible on Google Earth. There were 22 of them, each with 12 surrounding things, 42 meters in diameter, 420 meters apart, at longitude 420 east. It almost sounded like a joke. But then I copied the coordinates, and I looked. There they were, identical circles in an almost perfect line, 160 kilometers from any signs of life in the world's largest desert in the middle of the biggest country in Africa. This is a story about the limits of what you can find out on the internet, about all the different ways of looking at the same thing, and about going all the way there. Over the course of the last 20 weeks, we filmed every step of the process as we tried to figure out one thing. What could these circles be? Okay. So this whole story starts back in September 2021 when I first saw this Reddit post. I wanted to figure out what these markings were and make a video out of the entire reporting process, no matter how long it took, because the answer had to be out there. And step one, I knew I was going to have to send some emails. For weeks, I reached out to everyone I could think of. Algerian experts, officials, tour groups, even the closest hotel in a city called Insala. I read up on the town the circles were located closest to, Fogara-Izuya. I asked the commenters on the Reddit post, and we even tracked down a Twitter account we thought was the same Will K, who posted this question to several subreddits before deleting their Reddit account. I tried English and French, organizations, academics, locals, and then I waited. But there was one easy thing to clear up first. Were these circles real? Or were they just some kind of satellite imaging glitch? So I asked a teammate who works with maps a lot, Sam. He produces our series Atlas. And he pointed me to the company that takes a lot of the satellite pictures for Google Earth, Maxar Technologies.
I feel very confident that those are indeed on the ground, and because we see them in multiple images over multiple years. So I know it wasn't an artifact of the processing that Google might have done with our imagery. And then a colleague of mine who has spent a decent amount of time studying this area said, this is a very rich area for oil and gas. This looks very similar to what we see when they're doing oil exploration.
Oil radically changed the course of Algeria's history.
Oil from the wastelands of the desert, and it's believed that the Sahara is immensely rich in it.
When oil and gas were first discovered there in 1956, companies flocked to the region, against the backdrop of a brutal decolonization war with France. Today, Algeria is one of the world's top exporters of natural gas. What Steve is talking about here are seismic surveys, where geophysicists analyze the Earth's surface by sending shockwaves into the ground. Depending on how those seismic waves bounce back, researchers can tell what resources can be extracted from underground. Steve thought that maybe seismic pulses from a specialized vehicle could produce something like this. So, we had a hypothesis, but I wanted a second opinion. So I asked Bob Hardage at the University of Texas. He's one of the world's leading experts on seismic imaging. He responded by email. I can assure you with 100% confidence that the features in this imagery are not seismic arrays used in oil and gas exploration. First, the shapes themselves weren't right. There will be hundreds of thousands of receivers positioned as either a single straight line or as hundreds of parallel straight lines. I looked up pictures from NASA of seismic surveying, and you can see what he means. Second, the fact that we could even see them meant that they probably weren't a seismic survey. The objective is to leave the landscape like you found it. If a seismic crew created something like these features, a return visit would be made to restore the landscape. I have no idea what these circles in the satellite image are. Whatever they are, the people who created them wanted those features to be permanent. Closeout? I don't think we need to chat. Thanks, Bob. So I kept Googling. I found geotagged pictures from the nearest municipality, Fogara-Izuya, on a site called mapio.net. These old stone wells sort of look like they could be arranged in a circle, but reverse image searches were a dead end. I didn't know what to do next. So we looped in Vox Video's senior researcher, Melissa, to help me out.
So I was trying to find what this thing was. I don't know if you remember from his original post. He calls it the Tibal Ballet tomb. Do you remember that? Yeah, so I found this article. This is from like 1885. Okay. Yeah. The well of Tibal Ballet is at the latitude 27 degrees 20 and longitude 4 degrees 38. And that's approximately where what we're looking at is. And it says there are 2 circular tumuli. I had to Google that. I don't know that word.
Tumuli. It's a tumulus.
Tumulus.
It's an ancient burial mound.
Which seems like that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Encompassed by 2 concentric mounds in the form of rings, all of great regularity. The 2 rings are respectively 30 and 21 meters in diameter from crest to crest.
Wow. So a document from 1885 said that around the same area, there were 1, a bunch of wells, and 2, tombs with rings of great regularity. Now the sketches weren't an exact match, but they got us thinking, what if these things were actually really old? So I sent the pictures to a Tunisian archaeologist who had done research in this area. We spoke in French. Because of decades of French occupation in the 19th and 20th centuries, French is still used in many contexts in Tunisia and Algeria. And she had a new clue.
Ces monuments, c'est sans doute parce qu'Ain Salah, que je connais très bien, ces monuments-là, c'est en rapport avec l'eau. C'est un milieu désertique, c'est le Sahara. C'est l'endroit pratiquement le plus chaud au Maghreb. C'est une zone qui est très connue par le souci de cette chaleur-là, donc de la récolte de l'eau. Donc les gens, ils creusent.
Ah bon?
Ça a un nom, les Fogara.
Fogara. It's the North African name for a 2,500-year-old style of irrigation system that goes by many names but is often called a qanat. Builders dig a well at an elevated point on a slope deep enough to tap into groundwater. They then dig parallel shafts at regular intervals, and these provide airflow for diggers as they create an underground channel all the way back to the main well. With a slope of 1 or 2 degrees, the channel carries water long distances powered by gravity alone. In a part of the world with barely any rain and no running rivers, this technology provides water for crops and livestock and people year-round, making human-made oases possible.
C'est curieux, hein?
This was the most promising lead yet. It explained the desert location, the circular shape, the regularity and spacing. Even the closest municipality, Fogara-Ezouya, is named after Fogaras. And those Mapio images of wells started to make a lot of sense. But I wanted to run it by more people who had studied qanats.
Qanats are more than just, the kind of water infrastructures. I think they are the very raison d'etre. They're the kind of basis of inhabitation in such kind of harsh climates. They start from outskirts of the city, but then they usually end up into the city or into agricultural lands.
But when it came to our circles...
I have no take on it, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it now. Right. Okay, that's interesting.
There's something like 20 of them in a row.
Yeah. So that's definitely a Fogara. So at the end of that, there should be a town. There should be an oasis or something. But if it isn't, that means that probably the water the qanat or the Fogara has dried up. You should talk to Dale Lightfoot. He is the American geographer who knows everything about qanats.
These are what we're looking at.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't even say with confidence whether these are related to water collection, but I can tell you they're definitely not qanats.
Uh-huh. We also found these pictures. Do you think these could be what the circles are?
What you're showing me pictures of here looks a lot like just animal drawn wells. I've seen these in a lot of places. To me, this is not the same thing. I think you're back to square one.
Back to square one indeed.
Don't realize space aliens. I've heard they do crazy things too.
So they might be wells, but probably not a qanat, and maybe not even related to water at all. Could we at least rule that out? That's when Melissa found a database of oases in the Sahara with lists of the people who help manage their water supply. Like Mohamed Brick, a farmer in Laguat, Algeria.
Je pense pas que ça a été fait pour aller chercher de l'eau. Parce que le principe pour aller chercher de l'eau, c'est pour les besoins de la population et de l'agriculture. Si à 160 km à la ronde, il n'y a rien, ce n'est pas une hypothèse valable.
Ouais, car il n'y a pas de village.
Il n'y a pas de village, il n'y a pas de jardin, il n'y a pas d'oasis, il n'y a pas de plantation, il n'y a pas de population.
We were 3 months in, and it seemed like our most promising hypothesis yet was probably out. Then I got an email. Back in early October, Steve Wood promised to send me high-res images from Maxar's archive. Finally, we had them. It was the clearest look we'd had yet, and Steve believed it showed a new detail: tire tracks. If that was right, it would mean someone had been there within the last century. I kept asking people, historians, Algerian officials, archaeologists, and nearby residents. But after a while, I felt stuck. Like we had exhausted what we could find out on the internet, and there was nowhere else to go from here, except to the circles themselves. The longer this project went on, the more I realized we had a choice to make. We could keep interviewing more and more people, get more and more theories, and ultimately have no way to back any of them up. Or we could try to get someone there, try to film it, and then, maybe, we could know for sure. So I asked my teammate Christina, who works with journalists all over the world, if she knew anyone in Algeria. And that led us to Samir Ebchiche, a video journalist in Algiers. We hired Samir to be our on-the-ground journalist, to use his expertise in the area to help us solve this mystery. The next part took months.
Hello, Christopher. Salut, Samir.
Hello, Christopher.
Salut, Samir.
Salut, Christophe. We knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary video shoot. We were asking him and his team to travel incredibly far to go do something potentially dangerous. But Samir took the story into his own hands. He was obsessing over every hypothesis and setting up local contacts and figuring out all the details of how to get a team of people from Algiers, 15 hours away by car, to Insala, and then deep into the desert where no roads go. Finally, Samir figured out how to make it happen. And at 7 p.m. on a cool February night, he and his second cameraman, Abdlati, set off.
Et ça commence. Merde, ça commence pas. Allez, du thé. On trouve pas d'hôtel, ils sont tous fermés et on va essayer hôtel El Janoub.
La suite royale.
Oh. Je viens de me réveiller. Il commence à faire super chaud. Il n'y a pas de réseau. C'est jaune partout. Ouais, mais c'est bon.
Insala
300 km vers Insala. 150 km. On a vu que la ligne d'horizon.
They'd already spent 24 hours driving to get there. Now they had to go another 160 kilometers from Ain Salah into the desert. But they had to pick up someone else first. Farid Igilhariz, an archaeologist who used to lead Algeria's National Archaeological Research Center and managed one of Algeria's largest national parks. He's here to help the team identify whatever they come across. From there, they prepared. They got groceries, bought fuel, interviewed local officials, planned the GPS route, and they assembled a team: a driver, an archaeologist, an assistant, and a desert guide. It's right about here that I lost communication with Samir, and I wouldn't be able to hear from him until he was back in town, with, hopefully, a definitive answer.
C'est super hier, ça nous inquiétait un peu, donc ça reste un peu risqué parce que bon, c'est un passage où personne ne passe, très peu. Donc là on est avec 2 4x4, le premier il est fiable, l'autre on ne sait pas.
What's weird is that as the crew got closer and closer, they started finding signs pointing to every one of our theories. First, tire marks from seismic survey trucks, then a well system,
L'eau, il est à 3 mètres.
and finally, ancient tombs.
On avait un truc de loin.
C'est une tombe.
Voilà, un autre.
Donc ça, c'est un tumulte. C'est parmi les plus anciennes formes, justement, de monuments funéraires.
And on the morning of day 2, they checked the map. And
Là, on va pratiquement dans la bonne direction. Donc on est à 11 km du premier. Je pense qu'on les a trouvés. Fausse alerte. Fausse alerte.
باقي عليها 500 متر هي.
شفتها؟ ها؟ روح عليهم. يلا يلا. يلا راك. C'était beaucoup d'excitation. Mais c'était pas ici, mais apparemment c'est à 500 mètres. Normalement, on n'est pas loin. Oh, et là on voit rien. Là on voit rien.
Ah, 10, 11, 12. Voilà, nous avons les 12.
after 160 kilometers of driving off-road in the desert, they were there. The 22 circles, all in configuration. They were surprisingly faint. You might not notice them if you happen to be passing by. As Samir and the team explored the area, they found the next set, and the next ones.
Celui-là, il est un peu plus clair. Le trou, il sort.
And a lot of them had something in common. Metal wires.
Ils sont liés, et là, viens voir de près, regarde. Ils s'enfoncent au sol.
Ouais. Bon, là, je peux creuser un peu. Non, ici.
Non.
Ok. Oh, désolé. Voilà. Donc peut-être qu'ils ont creusé donc juste un petit trou. D'accord.
Under these little mounds was dynamite.
Mais là, nous avons autre chose aussi. On appelle ça, c'est des attaches. Hein. C'est ce qu'on met autour de caisses en bois.
C'est là où ils ont ramené la dynamite.
That inscription reads Sotemu. That's a French acronym for the Tunisian Company of Explosives and Ammunition. But one of the wires looked different than the others. It still had a yellow plastic coating. This is where it got a little scary.
Mais sors de là, reste pas là.
Fais attention, donc il faut leur dire de faire attention au cas où.
Eventually, they decided that the dynamite, if there was any left, was probably harmless because it would have needed a detonator to go off. So, they started to dig. But it was buried quite deep, so at some point, to be safe, they stopped. And then, they found a clue no one could have expected.
Fais-le.
Ah oui. Bricato français fabriqué en France.
Old cans of sardines and tuna.
Là, on a trouvé une petite boîte de conserve utilisée comme nourriture pour ceux qui ont travaillé donc ici, qui ont réalisé donc, cette exploration. Oh, il y a de la couleur.
Ça peut être la solution.
So we knew what it was. Dynamite buried underground. And when Samir and the crew finally got home, I called him to hear all the details.
Allô, allô. Mon anglais, ça le fait ou...
Ouais, c'est parfait.
We think that we know the solution. Donc une méthode de recherche de pétrole. Donc, but it was an old technique.
Oh. At the very beginning of this journey, that's one of the first things that anyone ever suggested, is that it had to do with searching for petroleum, which is crazy that it's finally confirmed. It's the same thing that they do today, just with dynamite instead of, more finely tuned technology.
Yes.
This is crazy. This is so much more wild than I expected. Ironically, it put us right back where we started. Seismic surveying. These circles are the remnants of surveyors looking for resources underground. This whole time, that first guess was right. But only sort of. Because Bob Hardage at the University of Texas was right when he said in that email that this doesn't remotely resemble seismic surveying, because this isn't what seismic surveying looks like today. It's an older technique from the early days of surveying that uses dynamite explosions instead of vibration machines. The explosions would provide the seismic waves that would reflect and refract off of the ground underneath, and that would tell surveyors that something, potentially something valuable, like oil, was underground and worth digging for. The circles looked like this because of the force of those dynamite explosions happening underground.
From this moment, a new question came, who did this and when?
Yeah. Knowing it was a seismic survey wasn't enough. But we had one more clue from the desert to turn to: the sardine cans. I reached out to Soapy-K, which seems to be the only one of these companies that still exists, but they said they couldn't identify their age by photos. So I found someone who's been collecting sardine cans for over 40 years, Philippe Anginot. He even made a museum out of it. And I showed him the pictures.
Ici, on a ce qu'on appelle une boîte 3 corps. Donc ça, c'est des boîtes typiques des années 1960. À partir de 1960, la conserverie Arsène Sopiquet devient Compagnie Sopiquet. Quand ça s'intitule encore Arsène, c'est qu'on est avant 1960.
So because this can is labeled Arsène Sopiquet, we know that it was manufactured before they changed their name in 1960. Because of its 60s style 3-body design, we know that it's probably from the very late 1950s. Granted, this is canned food, so it's possible that it was purchased years before it was actually eaten, but I think it's safe to guess that these cans were left behind by an oil exploration crew sometime in the late 1950s. All that was left was to figure out who those people were. Before going into the desert, Samir recorded interviews with the experts that they met along the way. And there was one interview with someone who actually would have been there in the late 1950s, the father of the desert guides who used to work as a desert guide himself.
اللي حبينا نعرفه شوف هذه تشوف هاد الصغار هادو راهم صغار
لكن ما عرفنا شنو هو هذا الشيء.
الفرج تاعها عندها بزاف وليد
عندها 53 انا فبرغا يجونا الكراريس منها للصوندان تاعها برغا على خاطر كيف هم.
فرج كان وكانت شركه تخدم في هذيك الجهه. واش كانوا يديروا ما عندكش ما
انا اللي نعرفوا فيهم كانوا يحفروا وخلاص.
واسمها الشركه؟
والله ما نعرف. لا كريبس انا نعرف لك الوقت لا كريبس يخدم.
CREPS, a French acronym for the Sahara Petroleum Research and Exploitation Company, was a joint venture between the French government and Shell. CREPS had a permit to explore and extract oil in this entire expanse of the Sahara from 1953 to 1958. Lining up that map with Google Maps shows that the circles are inside that CREPS sector. And according to these French Senate records, they started geological surveys right away. Within that time, CREPS became the first company to strike oil in the Sahara, in Eerily in 1956. This spurred a rush of oil companies into the region. And the struggle over control of Saharan oil became a centerpiece of France's brutal war against Algerian independence.
It was the end of nearly 8 years of bloodshed, and the African nation won its freedom after 132 years.
Even when Algeria won its independence in 1962, France maintained rights to Saharan oil for years to come. These circles are scars of colonialism. They're evidence of one country's attempts to take the resources of another. And they're only as isolated as they are because oil wasn't found there. Everywhere that it was transformed forever. So, we figured it out. These circles in the Sahara were left behind by French Krebs employees looking for oil. They were made by underground dynamite explosions, arranged in circles along a straight line through the desert. And based on the dates of the Krebs permit and the type of cans that they left behind, we can safely guess that they were there around 1957 or 1958. When we figured it all out, I emailed Bob, and he said this: "You have certainly done a persistent and thorough investigation. I am comfortable with the conclusion that your features are remnants of decades-old, first-generation analog recording of seismic data, an unbelievable preservation. Comparing 1950s seismic equipment and today's seismic equipment is similar to comparing propeller airplanes and deep space rockets. Essentially, there is no comparison, but two different worlds. Well done." Thanks, Bob. We only know this thanks to the help of dozens of people, someone's 65-year-old trash, a lot of time on the internet, and a long, brave journey into the desert. Of course, a story like this could always keep going, more and more specific. But at some point, to finish a story, we have to ask ourselves if the answer that we have is satisfactory. And I think this one is.